God does not make sense. Let me qualify that. God doesn't make sense because the Holy Trinity is a mystery that goes beyond what our human intellect can even conceptualize. So God doesn't make sense to our small, finite minds. I came to really appreciate that several years ago. A woman started meeting with me to talk through some questions she had about the Catholic faith. She had a history. She grew up Jehovah's Witness. Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in the Trinity. She knew the Jehovah's Witness faith really well. She'd read the Bible so many times. She knew it really beautifully well. But she was finding herself, she had left Jehovah's Witnesses years before meeting me, but she was finding herself drawn to Catholicism, drawn to Christianity in general. So we started meeting just to kind of talk through her very specific questions. And most of them were around the Trinity. Because in Jehovah's Witness belief, the Father is God, Jesus is not God, and the Holy Spirit is not God. So there is no Trinity. So a lot of our conversation revolved around Jesus in particular, looking at Jesus in the Gospels. And it was fascinating kind of watching her go through this journey and watching her just recognize, though she knew the Scriptures well, she had never noticed how much Jesus talked about himself as if he was God, or how much he talks about his relationship with the Father as if he was God, how many times he acted as if he was God. It became clear over the course of many conversations that Jesus certainly thought he was God. And if the resurrection happened, then he must be God. Now that had to be fascinating from her perspective, because suddenly what had seemed to be just the Father as God, you now got to make room somehow for Jesus. So I remember having this conversation, well, what if then God, he just kind of puts on the face of the Father at one moment, then he's the Son the next moment, then he's the Holy Spirit the next moment. That seems to make sense in the moment to her. But then we got to look at those gospel passages where, well, Jesus is talking to the Father. So it can't be God putting on a different mask. Somehow there's a distinction here. It was really an incredible journey for me to walk with her and just to see how challenging it is and to appreciate how challenging it is to understand and to accept that God is a Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. What that means for us, we would say that there is only one God. We have to absolutely hold on to that. There is only one God in three persons. The Father is not the Son is not the Spirit is not the Father. They are not each other. So that means we can't say that God puts on a mask one moment and another mask the next. We can't say that there's three gods just to resolve the problem. And we can't say that it's one God divided into three like a pie, because then no part of them is infinite, right? If you can divide some God into parts, then suddenly he's no longer God. So somehow we have to hold these things together, and they don't make sense to our human kind of categories. It's hard for us to get. And that's good. It's good that God is beyond. God is more. A few weeks ago, we had our confirmation mass here with kids. And I started asking kids if they would tell me how would they define God to their friends or to somebody else. And eventually, I kind of gave them a definition of God. I said, God is the most perfect being you could possibly imagine. He is the most good, the most beautiful, the most knowledgeable, the most wise, the most everything. God is the most perfect being you can imagine. But that's really only a part of it. It's kind of an insufficient definition in the end. If God is Trinity, I can't even imagine what Trinity means. I know that it is true that God is Trinity, but I can't actually imagine it. So I can't really say that God is the most perfect being that I can imagine. I have to say God is beyond that. God is more than the most perfect being I can imagine. He is more than the most good being I can imagine, or the most powerful, or most knowledgeable, or most wise. He is beyond all of our human conceptions. So what are we supposed to do about that? That probably makes us a little uncomfortable. We would probably just rather give up on thinking about it and go do something else. In the history of the church, I would say that if you kind of read the saints, even if you read some of the theologians who would love to explain this, they always fall back to one thing. They basically say, look, you're never going to get it. So just enter into the mystery. Enter into the relationship. That's the solution for us as Christians. We're never going to fully grasp it in our brains. But we're called to have a relationship with the Trinity. We can know the Trinity. We just won't understand the Trinity. Today we had a baptism. Beautiful little boy, Corbin David. And little Corbin today was baptized. He was entered into the life of the Trinity because he was united to Jesus. If you're united to Jesus, then everything that belongs to Jesus is now yours. That means that you've been now given Jesus' relationship with the Father. You've been given Jesus' relationship with the Spirit. That means that you have the ability, just like Jesus, to stay within the Father's will. You have the ability, just like Jesus, to move where the Spirit moves. That's what we're called to experience. We're called to enter into this mystery. And when we come to Mass and we receive the sacrament, we're renewing that union with Jesus. We're entering once again into the life of the Trinity. God doesn't make sense to our brains. But if we will choose to have a relationship with him, if we will choose to love him and know him, then we will understand the Trinity in our hearts.